I'm Jenny. Welcome to my house. Come in. Hello, my name is Jenny Laurel and I'm a permaculture garden designer. I have a business that's called Carpe Diem Gardens, and I design edible, ornamental gardens for people who live in the town or in the suburbs. I am passionate about rewilding the settled city landscape and also creating areas where there are food and beautiful flowers for people to enjoy as well. I first became interested in designing gardens and learning about plants as a child growing up in California. My mother was a very keen gardener, and so I always enjoyed playing amongst the plants and the flowers. When I came to England in 1970, it was the first time that I ever experienced herbal medicine, and I had some illness, and somebody gave me some medicine from the company Veleda, and I wanted to find out what the plants were, and that's how I started looking at the Latin names of plants and learning about herbs and wild plants. So that's now 50 years I've been interested in herbal medicine. The next stage along my journey as a garden designer was working with my daughter Marie. Now, Marie was born with a number of disabilities, but she also has some areas of great ability, and one of those is that she can sense in nature, in a garden, she can sense the life that is there very, very strongly. And back in the late 80s and the early 90s, it was for Marie that I began to design gardens that would be full of wildlife and birds to sing, but also sensory gardens that would have lots of wonderful scent and color and so on for her and for the children at the school that she went to. So that was my second stage. And then the third stage of becoming a garden designer was when I was sent a book by Robert Couric in California, and his book is called Your Edible Landscape Naturally. And that was the first book that gave me an understanding that it's possible to design an ornamental landscape using all food plants. And it's still very, very ornamental. And that's been an enormous inspiration for me. Somewhere along the way, and I don't know when it was, I encountered the word permaculture. And so ever since then, I've become much more intentional in how I design gardens to encompass the idea of wildlife and sensory pleasure for humans, but then also the utilitarian aspect of being able to grow food for people, even in places that it looks like they don't have space for an allotment garden. So those are the things that have inspired me, and it's been now 20 years since I founded Carpe Diem Gardens, my business, and I've been designing gardens the whole time. Permaculture is a word that was coined in the 1970s by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren in Australia. They were academics studying ecosystems, and they wanted to get away from the idea of monocultural systems growing single kinds of useful plants and recreate complex ecosystems that were based on following the patterns in nature. And so the first idea of permaculture meant a permanent culture of plants that was an entire ecosystem. Since then, the idea has widened very much to be a design methodology, a way of approaching designing not only landscapes and gardens, but also the interior landscape, home, organizations, local communities. There are a set of principles that can be put to use to think consciously and creatively about how to reach a goal through designing intelligently in order to achieve what needs to be achieved. I found out about permaculture first in the late 1990s, so it's just over 20 years ago. And I have now designed 3 different homes and gardens of my own using permaculture principles. The one where I'm living now in Lancaster is in northwest Britain in a very wet and windy coastal temperate climate. very different from South Australia, where David Holmgren, for example, has his place in Meliadora. So we have different conditions here. However, permaculture principles of design can be applied anywhere around the world, in any climate and in any situation, because they are based on following the patterns that you can observe in the place where you are. And some of those patterns are actual plant ecosystems that you can readopt, and some of them are also listening to and learning from the indigenous and traditional people who live in those places, who did live there in the past and who live there now, and who will have been able to live from the land in ways that we, from the Western way of thinking, have no idea at all. And so the combination of learning from nature itself, observing what is happening in nature right around where you are, and learning from the culture and the knowledge of the first peoples together enables one in the modern world now to create systems and ecosystems around homes, in neighborhoods, even in towns and cities, that are nature-based, that are resilient, and that will help us to rewild where we are now, to mitigate the effects of the climate catastrophe and species extinction. It's a very, very important skill set that I am completely devoted to sharing the skill set with as many people as I can, and also learning from other people who are also living in this way, so that I can continually learn and practice and improve my own design system. In permaculture thinking and design methodology, there is a concept of permaculture zones. And roughly what that means is starting from the individual designer, working outwards to areas which are more and more remote and more natural. And in permaculture thinking, there is the zone called 0-0, which is the zone here inside our own head, and that has to do with our spiritual practice, our way of viewing the world, how we take ourselves and go on a journey of learning and improvement. And then it moves out to the zone 0, which is the interior of the house and the home, which is where we have a lot of effect on how we run our home, how we capture energy, how we welcome people, and so on. So that's zone 0 for design, that we can apply the design principles to. After that, then there's zone 1, which is the area that we will visit every single day, and those are the areas which are closest usually to our dwelling, but not necessarily. They may also be along a pathway that we walk every day. And the kinds of things that's important to put in zone 1 are the kinds of plants, or if we're raising animals, that are going to need attention every day. But in addition to that, now that we've been struggling with the pandemic and being locked down and so on, in that zone 1, it's also really important to put those things that will bring us joy, that will bring us health, and that we can be mindful of in the beauty, so that can renew us for the work that we have to do in the world. And moving out from that, then there's zone 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. And each successive zone is where there will be less attention that is necessary on a day-to-day basis, and more space given to allowing nature to rewild and to do for the plants and the animals living naturally in your bioregion to simply be and to arrive and to come and to live without our intervention. But as a designer, it's particularly as I work in towns and cities and suburbs, often I come to people who have land that has no wild zone at all, because they have fences right up against their neighbor, and then there are streets and roads and motorways and all of that kind of thing. So it is very important in permaculture design not only to design zone 0-0, how we live our lives, how we go along our life journey, how we plan, what we do, how we teach, how we learn, but also to design for the furthest zone, to actually create zones where we welcome wildness and to import wildness in the form of certain plants which will attract certain animals and species, and that we actually consciously create zones, even in the midst of a brand new development of houses, that we consciously create zones that will become wild, where nature will come back and will do what nature has to do for all of us. And that requires an enormous amount of humility, because none of us understand the complexities of nature. People who are ecologists, they will be the first people to say that they've studied some of it and they understand some of it, but that it's so huge and it's so complex. But what we can understand is something that is fundamental, which is that nature requires space. It requires humans allowing it to be and to become and to enter back into where they live. And so we do have a role to play. Even though we cannot make nature happen, what we can do is protect the space and to create the space for nature to come back. One of the very important basic permaculture principles is to catch and store energy. And energy is in many different forms. It can be light or warmth or wind, or any other flow, water that flows through a place or a house or land. And when I moved into this house, there was a wall between the front, the kitchen, and the back, which is the sitting room. And the very first thing I designed was a window in that wall. And as you can see now, it's morning, and the window enables the light from the sunny side of the kitchen to come through here into the sitting room. Okay, let me talk about the wood stove. Originally, the house had an artificial gas fire. So when I wanted to have this installed, I asked that the flue be taken up through the bedrooms so that it would heat. It's a double skin flue, so it's not a fire hazard, but it heats the upstairs and the loft with the warm air before it goes out into the air. But I also wanted to talk about this in terms of the basic permaculture principle, which is that for every function that you have in your design that is absolutely essential, and heating is essential in the climate that we live in, it's really important to have different ways of supporting that function. In other words, to have different options in case one of the options falls away or doesn't work. So I have gas central heating in this house, which is wonderful. However, I'm aware that we need to reduce fossil fuels, and I'm also aware that the gas central heating is dependent on electricity to run a pump. And both of those, the gas and the electricity, are dependent on being attached to a national grid, both a gas grid and an electrical grid. And in trying to bring this modern house into some kind of resilience, it's really important that I now have an alternative way of heating the house, which has nothing to do with electricity for the pump and nothing to do with gas, which comes through the pipeline into the house. So this one appliance will heat the entire house. And also, it is a wood-burning stove. It could take coal, but I refuse to burn coal because I don't want miners to have to be under the earth digging coal. So a lot of the wood that I burn here comes from the gardens that I've designed and from the pruning during the year, or from other friends I have who are tree workers, and they have wood. Also, when the fire is on, the top plate is not designed specifically as a stove to cook on. However, it's very possible to boil water and to cook soup and things like that. And it has what's called a triple burn, which means that it burns not only the wood, but then it brings the wood gas back through. And you can see those holes up there. I don't know if you can see, but there are holes up at the top. And the gas that would ordinarily be going up the flue still has combustible material in it, in the form of gas. And so that's burned a second time. So that by the time you get nearly 80% efficiency of burning wood in this stove, and by the time the other things go up the flue, the smoke goes up the flue, it's pretty clean. And in fact, this stove, the Morso Badger, is allowed in clean air zones. Welcome to the meadow and to the edible hedge. This meadow is really 5 raised beds on a scrap piece of land in the estate where nobody was growing anything. And I've sown them with the help of the children who helped me, and my friend Siri, who helped to build the beds. We sowed meadow grass and meadow wild species to create a habitat, really, for all the different bees and pollinators and spiders and so on.